The rain came down in cold, hard sheets, and Elena Marsh ran through it, as if her life depended on it, because it did. Her shoes had slipped off somewhere near the old bridge, and now her bare feet tore across gravel and broken branches, but she did not stop. Behind her, she could still hear the engine of the black car, its headlights sweeping across the trees like searching eyes. She ducked behind a fallen trunk and pressed herself flat against the wet bark, her chest heaving, her heart slamming so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. She had left everything behind, her small apartment, her half-packed suitcase, the ring she had thrown into the river 3 miles back. She had left the only life she had ever known, because staying meant marrying a man who saw her as nothing more than a debt to be collected. Richard Colton had smiled at her the way a wolf smiles at a rabbit, and her father had signed the papers anyway, because the money mattered more than she did. Elena had told herself she would not cry. Not tonight. Not while she was still running. But the tears came anyway, mixing with the rain until she could not tell one from the other. She pressed her hand against her mouth to keep the sound in, and she waited, and waited, until the headlights faded, and the engine noise disappeared into the storm. She did not know how long she sat there, curled against the cold wood, before her legs gave out completely, and she sank into the mud. The forest around her was black and endless, the kind of darkness that swallowed sound and swallowed hope. She was somewhere she did not recognize, far from any road she knew, and for the first time since she had started running, she let herself wonder if she had made a terrible mistake. Maybe it would have been easier to marry Richard. Maybe it would have been easier to stay and disappear a little more each year, the way her mother had disappeared long before she actually died. But Elena had seen that ending already. She had watched it happen to a woman she loved, and she refused to let it happen to herself. So she cried in the rain, alone, shaking, with nothing left but the clothes on her back and a stubborn refusal to give up completely. It was in that moment, when she believed herself entirely alone, that she heard something move through the trees. At first she thought it was the wind. Then she thought it was an animal. A deer perhaps, or a fox, startled by the storm. But the sound was too heavy, too deliberate. Footsteps that did not belong to anything small. Elena's whole body went still. She held her breath and stared into the dark, searching for shape or shadow, and that was when she saw him. He stood at the edge of the clearing, tall and broad-shouldered, his dark hair plastered to his forehead by the rain, his eyes catching what little moonlight slipped through the clouds. He did not look surprised to see her. He did not look afraid of the storm either, the way she was. He looked, if anything, like the storm belonged to him, like the forest had simply stepped aside to let him pass. Elena scrambled backward, her hands slipping in the mud, panic surging through her chest. She had run from one dangerous man, only to find herself face to face with a stranger in the middle of nowhere, and every instinct in her screamed at her to run again. But her body would not obey. Her legs were shaking too hard, and the mud held her in place like a hand around her ankle. "You are hurt," the man said. His voice was low and calm, carrying easily over the sound of the rain, as if the storm made room for it. He did not move closer right away. He simply stood there, watching her the way someone might watch a wounded bird, careful not to frighten it further. "Stay back," Elena managed, her voice cracking. "Please, just stay back." Something flickered across his face, an emotion she could not name, gone as quickly as it appeared. He raised both hands slightly, palms open, the universal sign of someone trying to show they meant no harm. "I will not hurt you," he said. "You have my word." Elena almost laughed at that. Words meant nothing anymore. Richard had given her words too. Promises of a good life, of safety, of love that never once matched his actions. But something about this stranger's voice was different. There was no smoothness to it, no practiced charm designed to disarm her. It was simply steady, the way a mountain is steady, unmoved by wind or rain. He crouched down slowly, keeping his distance, and Elena finally got a better look at him. He was younger than she had first thought, maybe close to her own age, though something in his bearing made him seem older, as if he carried more weight on his shoulders than a man his age should. His clothes were simple but well made, dark and practical, suited for the outdoors rather than for show. There was a quiet authority in the way he held himself, something she could not quite place, but it made her feel, strangely, that she was safer with him nearby than she had been alone. "My name is Damien," he said. "I live not far from here. You are cold, and you are bleeding, and this storm is not going to stop for either of us. I would like to help you. Elena looked down at her arm and realized for the first time that a shallow cut ran along her forearm, likely from the branches she had pushed through in her escape. She had not even felt it until he pointed it out. Now that she noticed it, the sting rushed in all at once, sharp and burning beneath the rain. I don't know you, she whispered. I don't know anything about you. That is fair, Damien said. But you are sitting in the mud in the middle of a storm, miles from any town, with no shoes, and a wound that needs attention. Whatever brought you here, whatever you are running from, I think you need somewhere safe tonight. I can offer you that much, at least. She wanted to refuse. Every part of her wanted to tell him to leave her alone, that she could handle herself, that she had survived worse than a little rain, but her body was betraying her, trembling uncontrollably now, her lips numb from the cold, her vision beginning to blur at the edges. She had been running for hours. She had nothing left to run on. I don't even know where I am, she admitted, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Damien's expression softened, just slightly. You are on the edge of my land, he said. It is easy to get lost here if you do not know the paths. Let me help you. I promise you will be safe. There was something in the way he said the word safe that made her believe him, even though every rational part of her mind told her not to trust a stranger in the woods at night. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was simple desperation. Or maybe it was something else entirely, something she could not name yet, a pull she felt toward him that made no sense given the circumstances. She tried to stand, but her legs would not hold her weight, and she pitched forward into the mud. Before she could hit the ground, strong arms caught her, lifting her as easily as if she weighed nothing at all. She should have fought. She should have screamed. Instead, exhaustion finally won, and the last thing she remembered was the warmth of his chest against her cheek, steady and solid, a heartbeat that seemed to beat in rhythm with her own. When Elena opened her eyes again, she was no longer in the forest. She was lying on a bed far softer than anything she had slept on in years, wrapped in warm blankets, the sound of rain now muffled behind thick stone walls. A fire crackled somewhere nearby, casting flickering light across a room that looked like something from another century, all dark wood and tall windows and heavy curtains pulled against the storm outside. For a moment, panic seized her. She sat up too quickly, her head spinning, and looked around the unfamiliar room in confusion. Where was she? How had she gotten here? Her last memory was of falling in the mud, of strong arms catching her before darkness took over. The door opened, and Damien stepped inside carrying a tray with tea and a small bowl of something warm. He paused when he saw she was awake, his expression unreadable for a moment, before it settled into something gentler. You are awake, he said. Good. You gave me a scare, collapsing like that. Where am I? Elena asked, pulling the blankets tighter around herself. You are safe, Damien said, setting the tray down on a small table beside the bed. This is my home. You were exhausted and injured, so I brought you here, rather than leave you in the storm. I hope that was the right decision. Elena studied him carefully, searching his face for any sign of deception, any hint of the same darkness she had seen in Richard's eyes. She found none. Instead, she saw something almost like relief, as if her waking up mattered to him more than it should for a stranger he had only just met. Who are you? She asked again, more firmly this time. Really, not just your name. Who are you? Damien was quiet for a long moment, as if choosing his words carefully. That is a complicated question, he said finally. Perhaps too complicated for tonight, when you are still cold and tired and probably hungry. Eat something first. Rest. We can talk about everything else when you are ready. She wanted to argue, but her stomach growled loudly at the mention of food, betraying just how long it had been since she had eaten anything at all. Reluctantly, she accepted the bowl he offered, some kind of warm broth that tasted better than anything she remembered eating in months. Richard had never cooked for her, never even asked if she was hungry. He had simply expected her to be grateful for whatever he decided to provide, whenever he decided to provide it. As she ate, Damien sat in a chair, a respectful distance away, watching her with an intensity that should have felt uncomfortable, but instead, felt oddly like being cared for. She was not used to that feeling. It unsettled her almost as much as it soothed her. You were running from something, Damien said eventually, his voice careful. You do not have to tell me what, but I want you to know that whatever it was, You do not have to face it alone tonight. Elena's throat tightened. She had not expected kindness from a stranger. Not after everything she had endured. She had almost forgotten what it felt like to have someone offer help without expecting something in return. I was supposed to get married, she said quietly, surprising herself with how easily the words came out. To a man my father chose, a man who did not care about me at all, only about what marrying me could get him. I couldn't do it. I couldn't spend my whole life like that. Damien's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, a flash of something fierce crossing his features before he mastered it. No one should be forced into a life they do not choose, he said, his voice low but firm. You were right to run. You don't even know me, Elena said. You don't know if I'm telling the truth. I know enough, Damien said simply. I know you were terrified enough to run through a storm with no shoes on your feet. That tells me everything I need to know about what you were running from. Something about his certainty, his unwavering belief in her, without needing more explanation, cracked something open inside her chest that she had kept locked tight for years. She had spent so long convincing herself that she deserved whatever happened to her, that her father's decisions and Richard's cruelty were simply the price of being who she was. Hearing someone tell her, without hesitation, that she had done the right thing, felt like being handed something she had not realized she was starving for. They sat together in silence for a while after that, the fire crackling softly, the storm slowly beginning to quiet outside the thick stone walls. Elena finished the broth and found her eyes growing heavy again, sleep tugging at her despite the strange circumstances she found herself in. Rest now, Damien said gently, noticing her exhaustion. You are safe here. No one will hurt you while you are under my protection. Why? Elena asked, the question slipping out before she could stop it. Why would you protect someone you just met? Damien hesitated, and for a moment, Elena thought she saw something almost vulnerable pass across his face, quickly hidden away again. Because some things, he said quietly, you simply know the moment you see them, and I knew, the moment I found you in that storm, that you were someone worth protecting. The words settled over her like the warm blankets wrapped around her shoulders, strange and unfamiliar, but not unwelcome. She did not understand what he meant, not fully, but something in his voice told her this was not a simple kindness offered to any stranger who crossed his path. There was weight behind his words, a certainty that went deeper than politeness. She drifted to sleep before she could ask him to explain, the sound of the fire and the fading storm, lulling her into the first peaceful rest she had known, in longer than she could remember. She did not dream of Richard that night, or of her father's disappointed face, or of the wedding she had escaped just hours before. Instead, for reasons she could not explain, she dreamed of steady arms and a calm voice, promising safety. And somewhere in the depths of that dream, she felt, for the first time in years, that she was no longer entirely alone. When morning came, sunlight streamed through the tall windows, chasing away the last shadows of the storm. Elena woke slowly, momentarily forgetting where she was, until the unfamiliar room reminded her of everything that had happened the night before. She sat up, running a hand through her tangled hair, and noticed a set of clean clothes folded neatly on a chair beside the bed, along with a note in careful handwriting. There is food downstairs when you are ready. Take your time. Nothing here will rush you. She read the note twice, something warm blooming in her chest at the simple consideration behind it. She dressed quickly, grateful for dry clothes that fit reasonably well, and made her way out of the room into a hallway that looked even grander in daylight than it had by firelight the night before. Tall windows lined one wall, overlooking gardens that stretched toward a dense forest in the distance. The architecture was old, clearly historic, yet everything felt lived in, rather than simply preserved for show. As she made her way down a wide staircase, she heard voices below, low and urgent, and she paused, listening despite herself. You cannot simply bring a stranger into the heart of our territory, a woman's voice said sharply. Do you understand what you have done? What this means? I understand exactly what I have done, Damien's voice replied, calm but firm. And I do not need to explain myself to you or anyone else. She is human, the woman pressed, completely unaware of what we are. This has never happened before, not in living memory. The council will demand answers. Then I will give them answers, Damien said, when I have them myself. Elena's pulse quickened at the strange conversation, confusion tangling with a growing sense of unease. What did the woman mean? What we are? What counsel? She took another step down, unable to stop herself from wanting to understand, and the old stair creaked beneath her weight, announcing her presence before she was ready. Both voices fell silent immediately. Damien turned toward the staircase, his expression shifting the moment he saw her, softening into something gentler despite the tension still visible in his shoulders. Beside him stood a striking woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper expression, who studied Elena with open suspicion. "Elena," Damien said, his voice carefully even. "I hope you slept well." "I did," Elena said slowly, glancing between him and the woman beside him. "I heard voices. Is everything all right?" "Everything is fine," Damien said, though the woman beside him made a small, disbelieving sound. "This is Corinne. She helps manage matters here. Corinne, this is Elena." Corinne's gaze swept over Elena with an intensity that made her skin prickle, assessing and calculating in a way that felt entirely different from Damien's steady, protective attention. "A pleasure," Corinne said, though her tone suggested otherwise entirely. Elena forced a small smile, unsure how to respond to the obvious tension crackling between the three of them. She was beginning to realize there was far more to this place, and to Damien himself, than she had understood the night before. The steady voice that had promised her safety in the storm now belonged to a man surrounded by mystery, secrets, and clearly, some kind of authority that made others defer to him, even when they disagreed. "Perhaps," Damien said, turning fully toward Elena, his expression gentling once more, "we should talk. There are things you deserve to know, now that you are rested and safe. Things that may be difficult to believe, but that I think you have a right to understand." Elena's heart pounded, uncertainty warring with the strange sense of trust that had settled over her since the moment he found her in the storm. She did not know what he was about to tell her, or how it would change everything she thought she understood about the world and the man standing before her. But she knew, somehow, that whatever came next would change everything. "All right," she said quietly, steadying herself. "Tell me." Damien held her gaze for a long moment, something unreadable passing behind his eyes, before he finally spoke the words that would upend everything she thought she knew. "I am not entirely human," he said. "And neither, as of last night, are you entirely safe from what that means." The words hung in the air between them, impossible and strange, and Elena felt the ground beneath her certainty begin, quietly and irrevocably, to shift. Elena stared at Damien, certain she had misheard him. The morning light streaming through the tall windows suddenly felt too bright, too ordinary, for the strangeness of what he had just said. Not entirely human. The words did not fit together in any way that made sense, and yet something in his steady gaze told her he was not joking, and he was not mad. "I don't understand," she said slowly. "What does that even mean?" Corinne, still standing nearby, folded her arms and watched the exchange with an expression that was hard to read, somewhere between disapproval and reluctant curiosity. Damien glanced at her once, and whatever silent communication passed between them, Corinne stepped back, giving them space without leaving the room entirely. "Come," Damien said gently to Elena. "Let us sit. This is easier explained calmly than standing on a staircase." He led her into a large room with tall bookshelves and a fireplace that had burned down to gentle embers overnight. Elena sat stiffly on the edge of a chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, watching him settle across from her with the kind of patience that suggested he had done this before, or at least imagined doing it. "What I am about to tell you will sound impossible," Damien began. "I understand if you do not believe me at first, but I would rather you hear the truth from me than discover it in a way that frightens you more." Elena nodded, though her chest felt tight with anticipation. "There are people in this world," Damien said, "who are not entirely what they appear. We look human, we live among humans, but we carry something else within us, an ability to become something more than a man or woman. A wolf, when the need or the moon calls for it." Elena blinked. Whatever she had expected him to say, it had not been that. "A wolf," she repeated flatly. "You're telling me you turn into a wolf?" "Yes," Damien said, without hesitation or embarrassment, as if the admission cost him nothing at all. "My family has led this territory for generations. We are what some call shifters, though among ourselves, we are simply pack. I am the leader of this pack. Some call me Alpha, others call me King, though I have never much cared for titles. Elena laughed, a short, disbelieving sound that held no real humor in it. This is a joke, she said. This has to be a joke. People don't turn into wolves. I understand your disbelief, Damien said calmly. Would it help if I showed you? Before she could answer, he stood and walked toward the far end of the room, near a set of doors that led out to the gardens. He glanced back at her once, something almost apologetic in his expression, and then he stepped outside. Elena rose from her chair, drawn by curiosity despite her disbelief, and followed him to the doorway. What she saw in the garden beyond made her breath catch painfully in her throat. Where Damien had stood only a moment before, there now stood a wolf, enormous and dark-furred, easily the size of a large dog, but built with a kind of power that no ordinary animal could possess. Its eyes, when it turned to look at her, were unmistakably the same as Damien's, sharp and intelligent and unmistakably aware. Elena's legs gave out beneath her, and she sank onto the nearby bench, staring in stunned silence. The wolf padded closer, slowly, deliberately, giving her every chance to run if she wished. She did not run. She could not have moved even if she wanted to, her entire understanding of the world rearranging itself in real time. The wolf sat a respectful distance away, watching her with patient, steady eyes, and then, in the space of a breath, the shape shifted again, folding and reforming, until Damien knelt where the wolf had been, fully human once more, his expression cautious, as he studied her reaction. I know this is difficult to accept, he said quietly. Elena struggled to find words. That's not possible. That's not real. And yet you saw it, Damien said gently, with your own eyes. Elena pressed both hands against her face, trying to steady her racing thoughts. Everything about the world she thought she understood had just been proven false in the span of a single morning. Wolves that were men who were wolves. A council that judged such things. A woman named Corinne, who clearly did not trust her. Why are you telling me this? Elena asked finally, lowering her hands. Why not just let me leave, thinking I imagined the whole thing? Damien's expression grew serious, almost solemn. Because, he said, there is something else you need to understand. Something that concerns you directly, not just as someone I found in the storm. Elena's stomach tightened with a fresh wave of apprehension. What do you mean? Damien hesitated, seeming to search for the right words, though nothing about his usual calm confidence faltered entirely. Among my people, he said slowly, there exists a bond between certain individuals, a connection deeper than choice or circumstance. We call it a mate bond. It is rare, and it cannot be forced or chosen. It simply happens, when it happens, and once it does, it cannot easily be undone. And you're saying? Elena's voice trailed off, understanding beginning to dawn, dreadful and impossible all at once. I am saying, Damien said, meeting her eyes steadily, that the moment I found you in that storm, I recognized something in you that I have never recognized in anyone else. You are my mate, Elena. Whether either of us wanted this or not, the bond exists between us now. Elena stood abruptly, putting distance between them, her mind reeling from the weight of his words. That's insane, she said, her voice rising. You can't just decide that. You can't just tell me I belong to you because some bond exists that I never agreed to. You are right to be angry, Damien said, remaining seated, giving her the space she clearly needed. I do not expect you to accept this easily, or quickly, or perhaps ever, if that is your choice. The bond does not mean I own you, Elena. It does not mean you owe me anything. It simply means that I feel a connection to you that I cannot ignore, and that I will protect you, whether or not you choose to accept what that connection means. Elena paced the length of the room, her thoughts a chaotic tangle of fear, disbelief, and something else she could not quite name, something that felt dangerously close to relief. She had spent so long being told what to do, who to marry, how to live, by men who cared nothing for her own wishes. The idea that this bond, however strange and impossible, might come without demands, felt almost too good to be believed. You told me I was mine now, she said suddenly, remembering the words he had spoken to her the night before, half-conscious in the rain. In the storm, you said you're mine now. What did you mean by that? Damien's expression shifted, something almost regretful passing behind his eyes. I meant that you were under my protection, he said, that nothing would harm you while I stood between you and danger. I did not mean to claim ownership over you, Elena. I am sorry if my words frightened you. It was instinct speaking, not intention. Elena studied him carefully, searching for any sign of the manipulation she had grown so accustomed to expecting from men who wanted something from her. She found none. Instead, she saw only quiet sincerity, and something in her chest, long guarded and closed off, loosened just slightly. I need time, she said finally. I need time to understand all of this. I can't just accept that wolves are real, or that some mystical bond has decided my future for me. You have all the time you need, Damien said. No one here will force you into anything, Elena. Not the bond, not the pack, not me. You are free to leave whenever you choose, though I would ask you to consider staying, at least until you are certain it is safe to do so. The man you ran from is still out there, and I would rather know you were protected than risk you facing him alone. The mention of Richard sent a cold shiver through her, the fear she had almost forgotten in the strangeness of the morning rushing back in full force. She thought of his cold smile, his casual cruelty, the way her father had looked at her with disappointment rather than love when she had begged him not to sign the papers. He'll come looking for me, Elena admitted quietly. He doesn't like losing things he considers his. Something dark flickered across Damien's face at her words, gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced again by careful calm. Then let him come, he said. You will be safe here, whatever else you decide. Elena wrapped her arms around herself, the weight of everything she had learned pressing down on her all at once. A world of wolves and mates and ancient bonds. A man who claimed to feel something for her that defied explanation, yet asked nothing of her in return. A council somewhere that apparently held opinions about all of this that she did not yet understand. I don't know if I can trust any of this, she admitted. It's all too strange, too sudden. I do not ask you to trust it blindly, Damien said. I only ask you to give yourself time to see it clearly, before you decide what it means for you. Whatever you choose, Elena, I meant what I said in the storm. You are safe now. That much will not change, regardless of what else you decide about the rest. Elena looked at him for a long moment, this strange man who had pulled her from the mud and given her more honesty in one morning than Richard had given her in the entire length of their engagement. She still did not understand what any of this meant for her future, or whether she could trust a world so far removed from anything she had ever known. But for the first time since she had started running through that storm, she did not feel entirely afraid of what came next. All right, she said quietly, tell me more. Tell me everything. And so, as the morning sun climbed higher over the gardens outside, Damien began to explain the world she had stumbled into, one careful truth at a time, while Elena listened, still uncertain, but no longer entirely lost. Days passed slowly at first, then began to blur together in a way Elena had not expected. She had thought, when Damien first told her the truth about himself, that she would spend every waking moment consumed by fear or disbelief. Instead, she found herself settling, cautiously, into the rhythm of a household unlike any she had ever known. The estate, as she came to understand it, was more than a simple home. It was the heart of an entire community, hidden carefully from the human world beyond its borders. Beyond the gardens and the old stone walls, a village stretched through the surrounding forest, home to dozens of families who lived quiet, ordinary-looking lives by day, and carried an extraordinary secret within them at all times. Elena spent her mornings exploring the estate grounds, always accompanied at a respectful distance by someone Damien trusted, though never crowded or watched too closely. She learned the names of the staff who worked in the kitchens, a cheerful older woman named Margaret who insisted on feeding her more than she could possibly eat, and a quiet young man named Tobias, who tended the gardens with a gentleness that reminded her, oddly, of her own mother. You get used to it, Margaret told her one morning, kneading bread dough with practiced hands, while Elena sat at the kitchen table, still adjusting to the strangeness of her new surroundings. The whole shifting business seems impossible at first, and then one day you realize you have not thought twice about it in weeks. How long have you known, Elena asked, about all of this? My whole life, Margaret said with a small laugh. Married into it, actually. My husband was Pack, may he rest peacefully. Best thing that ever happened to me. even with all the strangeness that came along with it. Elena turned the words over in her mind, trying to imagine a life where something so impossible became simply another part of everyday existence. It seemed unfathomable to her still, though less so with each passing day she spent among people who treated the whole matter with such casual acceptance. Not everyone treated her with the same warmth, however. Corinne remained coolly distant whenever their paths crossed, her expression carefully neutral, but never quite hiding the suspicion that simmered beneath the surface. Elena had tried, on more than one occasion, to bridge the gap between them, but Corinne always found a reason to excuse herself before any real conversation could take place. She does not trust easily, Damien explained one evening, as they walked together through the gardens after dinner. The sky had cleared entirely since the storm that had brought Elena to his door, and stars now scattered across the darkness above them, in numbers she had never seen from the city. Corinne lost people she loved to circumstances she could not control. It has made her cautious of anything unfamiliar. She thinks I'm dangerous, Elena said, or that I'll make things dangerous for you. She worries, Damien corrected gently. There is a difference. She has served this pack faithfully for years, and her concern, however sharply expressed, comes from loyalty rather than cruelty. Elena considered this as they walked, the crunch of gravel beneath their feet, the only sound besides the distant call of night birds settling into the trees. She had noticed, over the past several days, that Damien never spoke poorly of anyone, even those who clearly disagreed with his decisions. He held his authority with a kind of quiet patience that reminded her nothing at all of Richard's demanding, controlling presence. "Can I ask you something?" Elena said after a moment. "Of course. This council you mentioned, the one your friend spoke of that first morning, what exactly do they want from you, from this whole situation?" Damien was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful in the moonlight. "The council governs certain matters that affect all the packs in this region, not only mine," he explained. "Traditions, disputes, matters of succession and alliance. A human mate, particularly one entirely unaware of our world before now, is unprecedented in living memory. They will have questions, possibly objections. Objections about me," Elena said flatly. "Objections about circumstances they do not yet understand," Damien corrected. "Not about you specifically, Elena. Many of them have never met you at all." Elena wrapped her arms around herself, a familiar chill settling over her despite the mild evening air. She had spent so much of her life being judged by people who did not know her, decided about by councils and fathers and fiancés who cared more about rules and expectations than about who she actually was. The idea that this strange new world might hold the same judgment felt disheartening, even as she tried to remind herself that Damien, at least, had never once made her feel that way. "What happens if they decide against us?" she asked quietly. "Against this bond, or whatever it's called." Damien stopped walking and turned to face her fully, his expression serious, but not unkind. "Nothing happens that either of us does not choose to allow," he said firmly. "The council can advise, and in some matters, they can influence decisions that affect the wider pack structure. But the mate bond is not theirs to dissolve, Elena. It exists between us, or it does not, regardless of what any council decides." His certainty steadied something in her chest that had been trembling since the moment she first learned the truth about him. She still did not fully understand what the bond meant, or whether she believed in it the way he clearly did, but she believed, more each day, that he would not force her into anything she did not want, regardless of what pressures surrounded them both. "I keep waiting for the part where you ask something of me," she admitted, surprising herself with her own honesty, "where all of this kindness turns out to have a price." Something in Damien's expression shifted, a flicker of quiet sorrow crossing his features before he mastered it. "I am sorry," he said, "that you have learned to expect that from people. I will not pretend I understand everything you endured before you came here, Elena, but I promise you, whatever kindness I offer, it does not come with hidden costs. You owe me nothing, simply because I found you in that storm." Elena felt her throat tighten unexpectedly, tears threatening in a way that had nothing to do with fear or sadness this time. It had been so long since anyone had offered her anything without expecting something in return, that the simple sincerity of his words nearly overwhelmed her. "Thank you," she managed finally, "for not being like the others." "You do not need to thank me for basic decency," Damien said gently, "though I understand why it might feel that way. given what you have known. They continued walking in companionable silence after that, the tension between them easing into something softer, something that felt, to Elena's surprise, almost like friendship, despite everything strange and impossible about the situation they found themselves in. Over the following days, Elena began to learn more about pack life beyond the simple fact of shifting itself. She learned that the pack operated on principles of loyalty and mutual protection, each member contributing to the well-being of the whole in ways both large and small. She learned that Damien's role as alpha carried genuine responsibility, not simple privilege, and that he spent long hours each day settling disputes, reviewing matters of territory and safety, and ensuring the community under his care remained secure and thriving. She often found herself watching him work from a respectful distance, curious, despite herself, about the weight he carried so calmly. One afternoon, she gathered enough courage to ask if she might observe one of his meetings, and though Corinne's expression tightened with obvious disapproval, Damien agreed without hesitation. The meeting involved a dispute between two pack families over territorial boundaries near the edge of the estate. Elena watched, fascinated, as Damien listened carefully to both sides, asked thoughtful questions, and ultimately guided them toward a resolution that left neither party feeling entirely triumphant, nor entirely defeated, but rather satisfied that fairness had been served. "You're good at that," she told him afterward, once the families had departed, clearly more at ease than when they had arrived. "It is not always easy," Damien admitted, rubbing the back of his neck in a rare moment of visible fatigue. "But it matters. A pack divided by unresolved grievances becomes vulnerable, both to internal strife and to outside threats. Fairness, even imperfect fairness, holds us together." Elena found herself admiring the careful balance he maintained, so different from the rigid, self-serving authority her own father had wielded within their small household. She began to understand, more each day, why the pack respected him so deeply, why even Corinne's sharp suspicion never crossed into outright disloyalty. Still, not everyone within the wider pack community shared such measured respect for the changes Damien's choices had brought. Elena noticed, during her occasional visits to the village with Margaret, that some eyes followed her with open curiosity, while others regarded her with something closer to distrust. Whispers followed her through the market square, quiet, but not quite quiet enough to escape her notice entirely. "They'll come around," Margaret assured her one afternoon, noting Elena's discomfort as they walked past a cluster of villagers who fell silent at their approach. "Change frightens people, especially change as significant as this. Give them time to see what I already see." "And what is that?" Elena asked. Margaret smiled warmly, patting her hand, in a gesture that felt almost maternal. "A good match for our alpha," she said simply. "Someone who makes him smile more in a week than I have seen him smile in years." Elena did not know how to respond to that, warmth and uncertainty tangling together in her chest in equal measure. And she had not thought of herself as someone capable of making anyone smile, not after years of feeling like a burden to be managed, rather than a person to be cherished. The idea that her presence might bring genuine happiness to someone else felt foreign, almost unbelievable. That evening, as she sat by the fire in the room that had gradually become her own, Elena found herself thinking not of Richard, or her father, or the life she had fled, but of Damien's steady voice, his patient explanations, the careful way he had shown her an entire hidden world without ever once making her feel foolish or overwhelmed for struggling to understand it. She thought, too, of the mate bond he had described, the connection he insisted existed between them regardless of choice or circumstance. She still did not fully understand it, could not yet say whether she believed in something so far beyond anything she had known before. But she found, increasingly, that she no longer dreaded the conversations that might help her understand it better. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts, and she found Damien standing in the doorway when she opened it, his expression carrying a hesitance she had not seen from him before. "I do not mean to intrude," he said. "I only wanted to check that you were settling in well tonight." "I'm fine," Elena said, and found, somewhat to her own surprise, that she meant it. Better than fine, actually. Something in his expression eased at her words, relief evident, despite his usual careful composure. "I am glad," he said simply. They stood there for a moment, neither quite ready to end the conversation, the quiet warmth of the fire behind her, mingling with the cool night air drifting through the open door. "Damien," Elena said suddenly, before she could stop herself. "Thank you. For everything. For not pushing me. For explaining things patiently. For letting me have this time to understand. I know this whole situation must be strange for you too, in its own way." Damien's expression grew soft, something almost vulnerable flickering behind his composed exterior. "You are worth the patience, Elena," he said quietly. "Whatever comes of this, whatever you decide, I do not regret finding you in that storm. Not for a single moment." The words settled over her like warmth spreading through cold limbs, and for the first time since she had fled her old life behind, Elena allowed herself to believe, just a little, that perhaps she had not run into more danger after all, but toward something she had never quite dared to hope for. Outside, the stars continued their slow wheel across the clear night sky, indifferent to the quiet, careful bond forming between two people who had, against every expectation, begun to trust each other with the fragile, precious weight of their own hearts. It was nearly 2 weeks after the storm that Elena first spoke of Richard by name, and even then, the words came slowly, dragged up from a place she had tried very hard to bury. They were sitting together in the library, a room Elena had come to love for its high shelves, and the quiet way afternoon light fell across worn leather chairs. She had grown comfortable enough in Damien's presence to sit in silence with him, something she had never managed with anyone else, not even her own mother in the years before illness had taken her. "You go somewhere else sometimes," Damien observed gently, not looking up from the paper he had been reading. "Your eyes stay here, but the rest of you goes far away." Elena startled slightly at how easily he had noticed, then let out a slow breath, deciding, for reasons she could not fully explain, that she was ready to share at least part of what haunted her. "I was thinking about Richard," she admitted. Damien set the paper aside immediately, giving her his full attention without pressing her to continue. He had learned, over their short time together, that pushing Elena only made her retreat further into herself. Patience, she had discovered, was simply part of who he was. "You do not have to tell me," he said, "but I am here, if you want to." Elena wrapped her arms around herself, staring at the fireplace rather than at him, finding it easier to speak the truth without meeting his eyes directly. "My father owed him money," she began. "A lot of money, from a business deal that went badly years ago. Richard offered to forgive the debt if my father agreed to let me marry him instead. My father said yes, before I even knew there had been a conversation." "You had no say in the matter," Damien said quietly, his voice carefully controlled, though Elena could sense the tension building beneath his calm exterior. "None," Elena confirmed. "I met Richard for the first time at the engagement dinner. He was charming, at first. Everyone said how lucky I was, how generous he was being, taking on my father's debt like that." She let out a bitter, humorless laugh. "It took only a few months for the charm to disappear entirely." "What happened?" Damien asked, his voice gentle but steady, giving her the space to continue at her own pace. Elena hesitated, old fear rising unbidden in her chest even now, safely removed from Richard's reach. "He did not like it when I disagreed with him," she said finally. "About anything. Small things, at first. What I wore, who I spoke to. Then bigger things. He controlled where I went, who I saw, what I was allowed to think about my own future. If I pushed back, even gently, he found ways to make me regret it." She did not elaborate further, and Damien, sensing the weight behind her carefully chosen words, did not press her to explain more than she was ready to share. Instead, a low, barely restrained anger settled over his features, controlled but unmistakable, directed entirely at a man he had never even met. "He never touched me in front of others," Elena continued after a moment, her voice growing quieter still. "He was too careful for that, too concerned with how things looked. But behind closed doors, he made it very clear what would happen if I ever tried to leave, or tried to tell anyone what our life together was really like." "And your father?" Damien asked. "Did he know?" Elena's expression tightened with old, familiar pain. "I told him once," she said. "He told me marriage was hard for everyone, that I needed to adjust my expectations, that Richard's money mattered more than my discomfort. He never asked what I meant by discomfort. He didn't want to know." Damien was silent for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, His voice carried a controlled intensity that Elena had not heard from him before. "No one should ever make you feel that your safety matters less than their convenience," he said. "Your father failed you, Elena, in a way that should never have happened. I am sorry that you carried that alone for so long." Elena felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, unexpected and unwelcome, though she did not try to hide them this time. "I kept thinking there was something wrong with me," she admitted. "That if I had just been better, more agreeable, less difficult, none of it would have happened the way it did." "There is nothing wrong with you," Damien said firmly, his voice carrying a conviction that left no room for doubt. "The fault belongs entirely to the people who failed to protect you, and to the man who chose to hurt someone who trusted him. Never to you, Elena. Not for a single moment." The certainty in his voice broke something loose in her chest, a dam she had not realized she was holding back for so long. She found herself crying then, not the frightened, desperate tears she had shed in the storm, but something deeper, something that felt almost like release. Damien did not reach for her, did not crowd her space uninvited, but he remained close, a steady, solid presence that asked nothing of her except her own healing. "I'm sorry," Elena said eventually, wiping at her eyes, embarrassed by the sudden display of emotion. "I don't usually do this." "You do not need to apologize for grief," Damien said gently. "Especially grief you have carried alone for far too long." They sat together in silence for a while after that, the fire crackling softly, the weight of Elena's confession settling gradually into something lighter, now that it had finally been spoken aloud. She had not realized how heavy the secret had grown, carried alone through months of fear and years of quiet suffering before that. "Can I ask you something?" Elena said eventually, her voice steadier now. "Of course. That night in the storm, when you told me I was mine now, you said you understood something about danger in my eyes. What did you mean by that?" Damien considered the question carefully before answering. "Among my people, instincts run deeper than they do for most humans," he explained. "When I found you, I could sense your fear, your exhaustion, the way your body had learned to brace itself against harm, long before that particular night. It told me enough to know you needed protection, even before you told me any details." Elena absorbed this, turning the idea over in her mind. "Is that part of the bond too? This, sensing things about me?" "Some of it," Damien admitted. "Though much of what I understood that night came simply from paying attention. You do not have to be bonded to someone to notice when they are suffering, Elena. You simply have to care enough to look closely." The simple honesty of his answer settled something uncertain in her chest. She had spent so long being told, implicitly and explicitly, that her pain was an inconvenience to be managed rather than acknowledged, that the idea of someone caring enough to notice it without being asked felt almost foreign to her. "I'm not ready to talk about all of it," Elena admitted. "Not yet. But I wanted you to understand, at least a little, why I ran the way I did that night, why I might still flinch sometimes, or go quiet unexpectedly." "You do not owe me explanations for your own healing," Damien said. "Take whatever time you need, Elena. I will not rush you toward anything. Not trust, not comfort, not anything else. You have earned the right to move at whatever pace feels safe to you." Elena felt a fresh wave of gratitude wash over her, so different from the constant pressure she had felt under Richard's control, where every hesitation had been met with impatience or punishment. Here, in this strange world of wolves and ancient bonds, she had found, unexpectedly, more genuine patience and care than she had known in years. Over the following days, something shifted subtly between them. Elena found herself sharing small pieces of her past more freely, no longer carrying the full weight of her history entirely alone. Damien listened without judgment each time, offering steady support rather than pity, and slowly, carefully, Elena began to feel the tight knot of fear in her chest begin to loosen, just slightly, for the first time in longer than she could remember. She also noticed, with quiet surprise, the ways Damien's protectiveness manifested without ever tipping into the controlling behavior she had grown so wary of. He checked on her well-being, certainly, but he never demanded to know her whereabouts, never questioned her choices, never made her feel that her autonomy was something to be managed rather than respected. "You're different from him," she told Damien one evening, as they walked together through the gardens after a quiet dinner. "Richard, I mean. I keep waiting for you to become like him, and you never do." I am not him, Damien said simply. And I never will be. You deserve someone who respects your choices, Elena, not someone who tries to control them. I'm starting to believe that, Elena admitted, surprising herself with how easily the words came. I didn't think I would, not this quickly, but I do. Damien's expression softened at her words, something warm and hopeful flickering behind his careful composure. That means more to me than you know, he said quietly. They continued walking beneath the darkening sky, the conversation settling into comfortable silence once more, the old wounds Elena carried beginning, slowly and carefully, to knit themselves into something less painful, guided by patience and genuine care she had never expected to find, especially not in the arms of a stranger she had met in the middle of a storm. Yet even as healing began to take root, a quiet unease lingered at the edges of Elena's growing peace. Richard was not a man who gave up easily, and somewhere beyond the safety of Damien's protection, she knew, with a certainty that chilled her more than any storm ever could, that he was almost certainly searching for her still. The council arrived on a gray afternoon, 3 weeks after Elena had first collapsed at the edge of the forest. She heard the commotion before she saw it, the sound of several vehicles making their way up the long drive toward the estate, and she felt her stomach tighten with an apprehension she could not quite name. They're here early, Corinne said, appearing beside Elena in the hallway, with an expression more serious than Elena had yet seen from her. The Alpha did not expect them until tomorrow. Is that bad? Elena asked, watching through the tall windows as several figures emerged from the vehicles below, dressed in formal, dark clothing that seemed almost ceremonial in its precision. It means they wanted the advantage of surprise, Corinne said grimly. Come. You should be present when they meet with him, whether they like it or not. Hiding you away would only confirm their suspicions that something here is being concealed. Elena felt a flicker of surprise at Corinne's uncharacteristic show of support, however grudging it seemed. She had grown used to the woman's cool distance over the past weeks, and this sudden alliance, however small, caught her off guard. Why are you helping me? Elena asked as they made their way toward the main hall. Corinne's expression flickered, something almost like reluctant respect crossing her sharp features. Because I have watched the Alpha these past weeks, she said, and I have not seen him this settled, this steady, in years. Whatever doubts I carried about you, I would rather see this bond given a fair chance than watch outsiders dismantle it before it has even had the opportunity to prove itself. Elena did not have time to respond before they reached the main hall, where Damien stood facing 3 figures Elena did not recognize, each carrying themselves with the same quiet, deliberate authority she had come to associate with pack leadership. An older man with silver hair stood at the center, flanked by a stern-faced woman, and a younger man whose expression held open curiosity as his gaze settled on Elena. Alpha Voss, the older man said, inclining his head slightly toward Damien, though his eyes moved almost immediately to Elena. This must be the human woman causing such conversation among the packs. Elder Whitlock, Damien said evenly, his tone respectful but firm. This is Elena Marsh. Elena, this is Elder Whitlock, head of the regional council. Elena forced herself to meet the older man's gaze steadily, refusing to let her nervousness show despite the weight of scrutiny directed her way. It's a pleasure to meet you, she said, her voice carrying more confidence than she actually felt. Elder Whitlock studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable, before turning his attention back to Damien. You understand the concern this situation has caused, he said. A human, unaware of our world until mere weeks ago, now residing within your household, claimed as your mate. Such circumstances demand careful consideration. I understand the concern, Damien said. I also understand that the bond between Elena and myself is not a matter subject to the council's approval or disapproval. It exists, regardless of tradition or precedent. The stern-faced woman beside Elder Whitlock spoke for the first time, her voice sharp and clipped. Precedent exists for good reason, Alpha Voss. A human mate introduces risks that this council cannot ignore. Exposure of our world. Vulnerability, through a partner who cannot defend herself as we can. Complications, regarding succession and pack stability. Elena felt her chest tighten at the woman's clinical dismissal of her presence, as though she were nothing more than a logistical problem to be managed, rather than a person standing directly before them. She thought of Richard's cold calculations regarding her worth, and felt an old, familiar anger rise beneath her nervousness. "With respect," Elena said, surprising herself as much as everyone else in the room, "I am standing right here. If you have concerns about my presence, I would appreciate the courtesy of addressing them to me directly, rather than discussing me as though I cannot understand the conversation happening around me." Silence fell over the hall for a moment, and Elena caught Damien's expression shifting towards something like pride, quickly masked beneath his careful composure. Elder Whitlock's eyebrows rose slightly, a flicker of genuine surprise crossing his weathered features. "Very well," the older man said after a pause. "Miss Marsh, do you understand the gravity of what you have stumbled into, the dangers our world carries, the responsibilities that would come with any lasting connection to our Alpha? I understand that 3 weeks ago, I did not know any of this existed," Elena said honestly. "I understand that I am still learning, every single day, what it means to be part of this world. But I also understand that Damien has shown me nothing but patience and respect since the moment he found me, which is more than I can say for most of the humans I have known in my life." The younger council member, who had remained silent until now, allowed a small, approving smile to cross his face, quickly hidden when the stern-faced woman shot him a disapproving glance. "Bold words," Elder Whitlock said, though something in his tone suggested reluctant respect rather than displeasure. "But words alone will not settle the council's concerns. This matter requires further discussion, Alpha Voss. We will need time to consider the full implications." "Take whatever time you require," Damien said evenly. "But understand this clearly. Whatever the council decides, the bond between Elena and myself will not be dissolved by outside decree. I would rather explain that plainly now than allow any confusion to develop later." Elder Whitlock studied Damien for a long moment, something calculating behind his gaze, before finally nodding slowly. "Understood," he said. "We will reconvene in the coming weeks to discuss this matter further. Until then, Alpha Voss, I would advise caution regarding how widely this situation becomes known among the packs. Rumor spreads quickly, and not always accurately." With that, the council took their leave, their vehicles disappearing back down the long drive as quickly as they had arrived. Elena let out a breath she had not realized she was holding, the tension of the encounter slowly draining from her shoulders. "That could have gone worse," Corinne observed, though her tone carried a note of grudging approval that had not been present before. "You handled that well," Damien said, turning to Elena with an expression of quiet admiration. "Better than well, actually." "I was terrified the entire time," Elena admitted, laughing shakily now that the immediate pressure had passed. "You did not show it," Damien said. "Elder Whitlock is not easily impressed, and yet I watched him reconsider his assumptions about you within minutes of meeting you." Elena felt a small glow of pride at his words, something she had not expected to feel after such a tense encounter. She had spent so long being talked over, dismissed, decided about by people who never bothered to ask her opinion, that standing her ground, even briefly, felt like reclaiming something she had not realized she had lost. Not everyone within the estate shared the same growing respect, however. Later that evening, as Elena made her way toward the kitchen for a late cup of tea, she overheard hushed voices near the study, tense and urgent, in a way that made her pause outside the door. "You cannot seriously believe the council will simply accept this," a voice Elena did not immediately recognize, said sharply. "A human mate threatens everything we have built, everything Lady Seraphine has worked toward for years." Elena's ears perked at the unfamiliar name, curiosity overtaking her better judgment as she leaned closer to listen further. "Lady Seraphine's ambitions are her own concern," another voice replied, careful and measured. "Our loyalty belongs to the Alpha, whatever choices he makes regarding his personal life. For now," the first voice said darkly, "but loyalty shifts when stability is threatened. Mark my words, this situation will not resolve as peacefully as the Alpha believes." Elena stepped back from the door quietly, unease coiling tightly in her stomach as she made her way toward her room instead of the kitchen, appetite for tea entirely forgotten. She did not know who Lady Seraphine was, or what ambitions the voices had referenced, but the ominous tone of the conversation left her with a growing sense that the council's scrutiny might not be the only obstacle standing between her and the fragile peace she had begun to find within these walls. That night, As she lay awake staring at the ceiling of her borrowed room, Elena found herself wondering, not for the first time, whether the storm that had brought her here had truly ended, or whether she had simply traded one danger for another, quieter and more insidious threat, waiting patiently in the shadows of a world she was only beginning to understand. The days following the council's visit settled into a strange new rhythm, one where Elena found herself watching shadows a little more carefully, listening a little more closely to conversations that trailed off when she entered a room. She had not mentioned what she overheard to Damien, uncertain whether it was simply idle gossip or something more significant, and unwilling to add unnecessary worry to a situation already burdened with enough uncertainty. Instead, she focused on the small, steady comforts that had begun to define her days. Mornings spent in the kitchen with Margaret, learning recipes passed down through generations of pack families. Afternoons in the garden with Tobias, who taught her the names of herbs and flowers she had never encountered growing up in the city. Evenings with Damien, walking through the grounds or sitting quietly together in the library, the comfortable silence between them growing easier with each passing day. "You seem lighter today," Damien observed one afternoon, finding her in the garden with dirt smudged across her hands from helping Tobias replant a bed of herbs. "I feel lighter," Elena admitted, sitting back on her heels and wiping a strand of hair from her face. "It's strange. I keep waiting for something to remind me that this isn't real, that I'll wake up back in my old apartment with the wedding still looming over me. But every day, it feels a little more like this is actually my life now." Damien knelt beside her, careful not to disturb the herbs she had been tending. "Does that frighten you?" he asked. "This new life becoming real?" Elena considered the question seriously before answering. "A little," she admitted. "Mostly because I don't fully trust good things to last, but less than it used to." "I am glad," Damien said simply, and something in the warmth of his tone made Elena's chest tighten with an emotion she was only beginning to allow herself to name. Over the following days, their conversations grew easier, less guarded, as trust continued building between them in small, patient increments. Elena found herself sharing more of her past, not all at once, but in careful pieces offered when she felt ready rather than pressured. Damien, in turn, began sharing more of his own history, the weight of responsibility he had carried since becoming alpha, far younger than most, the loneliness that came with leadership, the quiet hope he had long since stopped expecting to find someone who understood him beyond his title. "I never thought I would find this," Damien admitted one evening, as they sat together on a stone bench overlooking the gardens, the last light of sunset painting the sky in soft shades of orange and purple. "A mate. Someone who sees me as more than the alpha, more than a position to be filled. I had made peace with the idea that such connection might never come for me." "And now?" Elena asked softly. "Now," Damien said, turning to meet her eyes directly, "I find myself grateful for a storm I once cursed, because it brought you to my door." Elena felt her breath catch at the sincerity in his voice, the vulnerability he rarely allowed himself to show so openly. She reached out, almost without thinking, and took his hand in hers, the gesture simple but significant, given how carefully she had guarded her own touch since fleeing Richard's controlling grip. Damien's fingers curled gently around hers, warm and steady, asking nothing more than the simple connection she offered. They sat together in comfortable silence, as the sky darkened further, stars beginning their slow emergence overhead, and Elena found herself thinking, for the first time in longer than she could remember, that perhaps she had finally found somewhere she truly belonged. "Elena," Damien said eventually, his voice careful, "I want you to know that whatever happens with the council, whatever pressures arise from tradition or expectation, my feelings for you do not depend on any of it. I care for you because of who you are, not because some ancient bond decided it for me." "I believe you," Elena said, and found, with quiet surprise, that she genuinely did. The trust that had once felt impossible, after everything Richard had put her through, now settled naturally within her chest, steady and unshaken by the fear that had once colored every relationship she attempted. Their growing closeness did not go unnoticed within the estate. Margaret smiled knowingly whenever she caught them together. Tobias offered quiet, approving nods, and even Corinne's icy distance had begun, slowly, to thaw into something resembling grudging acceptance, if not quite full warmth. "You've changed him," Corinne admitted one afternoon, finding Elena alone in the library, curled up with a book Damien had recommended from his extensive collection. For the better, I mean. I did not expect to say that so soon, but it would be dishonest to deny it. He's changed too, hasn't he? Elena asked, setting the book aside to give Corinne her full attention. You've known him longer than I have. Is he different now than before? Corinne considered the question thoughtfully. He carries himself lighter, she said finally. Laughs more easily. I had begun to worry that leadership was hollowing him out. Slowly. The way it does to some alphas who forget how to simply be a person beneath the title. You seem to have reminded him of that. Elena felt warmth bloom in her chest at Corinne's words, gratitude mixing with quiet pride that she had brought something genuinely good into Damien's life, rather than simply receiving protection and kindness without offering anything meaningful in return. Thank you for telling me that, Elena said sincerely. And thank you for giving me a chance, even when you had every reason to be cautious. Corinne's expression softened slightly, something almost like a smile touching the corners of her mouth. Prove me right to have given that chance, she said, though her tone had lost its earlier sharpness entirely. That is all the thanks I require. As the weeks continued passing, Elena found herself growing more confident, more settled into the strange new life she had stumbled into. She began learning more about pack traditions, attending small gatherings where she met other pack members who greeted her, if not always with immediate warmth, then at least with growing curiosity, rather than outright suspicion. She and Damien spent long hours together, learning each other's histories, sharing small joys and quiet vulnerabilities, building something steady and real between them that had nothing to do with the mystical bond he had described, and everything to do with genuine, patient care. Elena found herself laughing more freely than she had in years, no longer flinching at unexpected sounds, or careful about every word she spoke, for fear of unpredictable consequences. Yet even as their bond deepened, a quiet unease continued lingering at the edges of her newfound peace. The name Lady Seraphine surfaced occasionally in hushed conversations she was not meant to overhear, and Elena could not shake the feeling that somewhere beyond the safety of the estate walls, forces were gathering that might not welcome the happiness she had finally begun to find. One evening, as she and Damien walked together beneath a sky heavy with stars, Elena finally worked up the courage to ask about the name that had been troubling her. Who is Lady Seraphine? She asked, watching Damien's expression carefully for any reaction. His steps faltered slightly, surprise and something more guarded flickering across his features before he composed himself. Where did you hear that name? He asked, his tone carefully neutral. I overheard some of the staff talking. The night the council visited, Elena admitted. They mentioned her ambitions, said something about the situation not resolving as peacefully as you believed. I didn't want to worry you unnecessarily, but I think you should know. Damien was quiet for a long moment, his jaw tight with something Elena could not quite read. Seraphine is the daughter of a neighboring pack leader, he said finally. There were expectations, once, before I met you, that our families might align through marriage. She was not pleased when I made it clear such an arrangement did not interest me, even before the bond between us formed. Elena's stomach tightened with sudden understanding. She wanted to be your mate, she said quietly. She wanted the position that came with being my mate, Damien corrected carefully. Whether genuine affection factored into her ambitions, I could never say with certainty. But I never encouraged the expectation, Elena, and I want you to understand that clearly. I believe you, Elena said. And she did, though the knowledge of Seraphine's continued presence in the shadows of their happiness left her with a fresh unease she could not entirely shake. But if she's still around, still influencing people against us, don't you think that's something we should address directly, rather than letting it simmer unspoken? Damien considered this seriously, appreciation evident in his expression at her practical, clear-headed approach to the problem. You are right, he said. I have perhaps underestimated how far her disappointment might extend. I will look into the matter more carefully, Elena. I promise you that. Elena nodded, grateful for his honesty even as new worry settled into her chest. She had come so far already, had built something real and precious within these walls, after fleeing a life defined entirely by fear and control. The idea that someone might be working, quietly and deliberately, to unravel that fragile happiness, filled her with a determination she had not fully recognized in herself before. Whatever Seraphine's ambitions, whatever schemes might be forming in the shadows beyond the estate's protective walls, Elena found herself resolving, with quiet but unshakable certainty that she would not simply retreat into fear again. She had run once already, had spent months of her life defined by that fear. She would not let it define her again, not now, not when she had finally found something worth standing her ground to protect. The letter arrived on an otherwise ordinary Tuesday morning, delivered by courier to the estate's front gate, before Elena had even finished her breakfast. Margaret brought it to her with a puzzled expression, noting that it bore no return address, only Elena's name, written in handwriting she recognized instantly, the careful, precise script that had once signed cards and notes, meant to feel romantic, but had always carried an undertone of control. Her hands trembled as she opened the envelope, dread pooling in her stomach even before she read the first line. I know where you are. This game has gone on long enough. You have 2 days to return home before I come collect what belongs to me, and I will not be gentle about it this time. The paper slipped from Elena's fingers, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps as old fear flooded back through her body with overwhelming force. Margaret, noticing her distress immediately, called for Damien, and within moments he was at Elena's side, his expression darkening as he read the letter she could no longer hold steady. He knows I'm here, Elena whispered, her voice shaking. How does he know I'm here? Damien's jaw tightened, controlled fury simmering just beneath his careful composure. I do not know, he said, but I promise you, Elena, he will not reach you here. This estate is protected in ways he cannot begin to understand. You don't know him, Elena said, panic rising sharper now. He doesn't stop. He never stops once he's decided he wants something. Neither do I, Damien said firmly, taking her trembling hands in his own steady grip. And I have decided, entirely and completely, that you are safe under my protection. Whatever threats he makes, whatever he believes he can accomplish, he will find himself facing consequences he has never imagined. Elena wanted to believe him entirely, wanted to trust in the safety he promised, with the same certainty he clearly felt. But months of conditioning under Richard's control had taught her that danger rarely respected boundaries, that men like him found ways around obstacles that seemed insurmountable to everyone else. Over the following hours, the estate transformed subtly around her. Additional guards appeared at the perimeter, quiet and watchful. Corinne moved through the halls with sharpened focus, coordinating security measures with a competence that spoke of long experience handling threats far more dangerous than a single desperate human man. Damien remained close to Elena throughout the day, his presence steady and reassuring, even as tension crackled visibly beneath his calm exterior. How could he have found me? Elena asked that evening, sitting curled in a chair near the fireplace, while Damien paced slowly nearby, clearly working through the same question himself. I do not know, Damien admitted, but I intend to find out. Whether someone spoke carelessly, or whether he simply hired someone skilled enough to track you, we will discover the truth. Elena wrapped her arms around herself, old fear tangling with a new, fierce anger she had not expected to feel so strongly. She had run so far, had built something precious and fragile within these walls, and the thought that Richard might simply arrive and shatter it all filled her with a desperate need to protect what she had found.
I won't go back to him,
she said firmly, surprising herself with the strength in her own voice. Whatever happens, whatever he threatens, I refuse to go back to that life. You will not have to, Damien said, kneeling beside her chair to meet her eyes directly. I promise you that, Elena, with everything I am. 2 days passed in tense anticipation, the estate humming with quiet preparation beneath its usual peaceful rhythm. Elena found herself unable to relax fully, jumping at unexpected sounds, watching the windows more carefully than usual, old habits of vigilance resurfacing, despite the genuine safety she knew she possessed within these walls. On the third morning, exactly as the letter had threatened, a car appeared at the edge of the estate's long drive, unfamiliar and out of place against the peaceful backdrop of gardens and old stone walls. Elena watched from an upstairs window, her heart pounding painfully, as Richard himself emerged from the vehicle, his expression carrying the same cold confidence she remembered so vividly. He's here, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, as Damien joined her at the window, his own expression hardening into something fierce and protective. Stay inside, Damien said firmly. I will handle this. No, Elena said, surprising herself with sudden, unshakable resolve. I need to face him myself. I've spent too long running, too long letting other people decide what happens to me. I need to be there. Damien studied her carefully, understanding dawning behind his concerned expression. He recognized, perhaps better than anyone, the significance of what she was asking, the need to reclaim agency over a situation that had once stripped every choice from her life. Together then, he said finally. I will not let him near you, Elena, but I understand why you need to face this yourself. They walked down together to the main entrance, where several members of PAC security had already gathered, positioned discreetly, but ready, should the situation require intervention. Richard stood near his car, his expression shifting from cold confidence to genuine surprise as he took in the scale of the estate, the clear evidence of wealth and authority that surrounded Elena now. Elena, Richard said, his voice carrying the falsely warm tone she remembered so well from the early days of their engagement, before the mask had fully slipped. You look well, better than I expected, given the circumstances. What do you want, Richard? Elena asked, her voice steadier than she had expected, standing firmly beside Damien rather than behind him. You know what I want, Richard said, his tone hardening slightly at her direct question. The debt your father owes me still stands, regardless of your little disappearing act. Our arrangement was clear. I am not property to be exchanged for debt, Elena said firmly. I never agreed to that arrangement. My father did, without my consent, and that agreement dies here, today. Richard's expression darkened, the charming mask slipping further to reveal the controlling anger beneath. You think hiding behind some wealthy stranger changes anything? He said, his gaze flicking dismissively toward Damien. This isn't your decision to make, Elena. It never was. It is entirely her decision, Damien said, his voice carrying quiet, controlled authority that made even Richard pause slightly. Elena owes you nothing, and you will leave this property immediately, or you will find the consequences considerably less pleasant than whatever debt you believe you are owed. Richard's eyes narrowed, calculating something behind his cold expression. This isn't over, he said finally, though his confidence had visibly diminished in the face of Damien's unwavering resolve. You cannot hide behind him forever, Elena. I'm not hiding, Elena said, stepping forward slightly, her voice carrying newfound strength she had not known she possessed. I'm standing exactly where I choose to stand, surrounded by people who actually care about my well-being, rather than treating me as a transaction to be settled. Leave, Richard. There is nothing here for you anymore. For a long, tense moment, Richard remained still, calculation and wounded pride warring visibly across his features. Then, with a final, cold glance toward Elena, he turned and climbed back into his car, driving away down the long gravel drive, without another word spoken between them. Elena let out a breath she had not realized she was holding, her legs suddenly unsteady beneath her, as adrenaline began draining from her system. Damien caught her gently, supporting her weight as relief and lingering fear tangled together within her chest. You did that, Damien said softly, pride evident in his voice. You stood your ground, Elena. That took tremendous courage. I was terrified, Elena admitted, her voice shaking now that the immediate confrontation had passed. Courage does not mean absence of fear, Damien said gently. It means standing firm despite it. You did that beautifully. Elena allowed herself to lean into his support, exhaustion from the confrontation settling heavily over her now that the danger had passed, at least for the moment. She did not believe, not truly, that Richard would simply give up so easily. Men like him rarely accepted defeat gracefully, but for the first time since fleeing her old life, she had faced her fear directly, rather than simply running from it, and something about that confrontation had shifted permanently within her, a quiet strength settling into place that she suspected would never fully leave her again. As they made their way back inside, Corinne appeared, her expression grave, despite the successful resolution of the immediate confrontation. Alpha, she said quietly, we need to discuss how he found this location. I do not believe this was simple chance. Damien's expression sharpened with renewed concern, and Elena felt the fragile peace of the moment giving way once more to uncertain unease. Whatever victory they had achieved facing Richard directly, the deeper question of how their secret location had been compromised remained unanswered, casting a shadow of doubt over the safety Elena had only just begun to trust completely. The investigation into how Richard had located the estate began quietly, Corinne leading a careful review of the household staff and recent visitors with the methodical precision Elena had come to expect from her. Elena tried to focus on ordinary routines during the following days, though the lingering uncertainty made genuine relaxation difficult to find. It was Tobias, quiet and observant as always, who first noticed something troubling. He approached Elena in the garden one afternoon, his expression uncharacteristically hesitant. "There's something I think you should know," he said, glancing around to ensure they were not overheard. "About Lady Seraphine. She visited the estate twice while you were still recovering from your journey here, before you were fully aware of everything happening around you. I did not think much of it at the time, but given recent events, I thought you should know." Elena's stomach tightened with sudden understanding. "You think she's connected to how Richard found this place?" "I cannot say for certain," Tobias admitted, "but she asked unusual questions during her visits. About you specifically. Where you had come from. What circumstances brought you here." I answered honestly, not realizing the information might be used against you. Elena thanked him for the warning, and immediately sought out Damien, sharing what she had learned with growing certainty, that the pieces were beginning to form a troubling picture. Damien's expression darkened as he listened, controlled anger simmering beneath his careful composure. "I should have looked into this more seriously the moment you first mentioned her name," he said, frustration evident in his voice. "I underestimated how far her resentment might extend." "We need proof," Elena said practically, old fear giving way to determined focus. "Suspicion alone won't be enough to address this properly, especially with the council already watching us closely." Together, they began quietly gathering information, Corinne's investigative skills proving invaluable as they pieced together a timeline of Seraphine's movements and contacts over the preceding weeks. What they discovered confirmed their worst suspicions. Seraphine had indeed sought out information about Elena's past, eventually tracking down details about her broken engagement and, through channels that remained unclear, making contact with Richard himself. She wanted him to force the issue, Corinne explained, laying out the evidence they had gathered during a tense meeting in Damien's study. Reasoning that if Elena's past caught up with her here, either the resulting chaos would drive Elena away entirely, or it would create enough scandal to weaken the Alpha's position with the council, opening space for alternative arrangements to be considered. Elena felt sick at the calculated cruelty of the scheme, the casual way her pain and trauma had been weaponized as a tool in someone else's ambitions. "She used my worst fear as a weapon," she said quietly, "just to get what she wanted." "She will answer for this," Damien said, his voice carrying quiet, controlled fury. "Whatever consequences the council might have hesitated to impose regarding our bond, they will not hesitate regarding deliberate sabotage and manipulation within pack politics." Before they could act on this knowledge, however, urgent news arrived that shifted the danger from calculated scheming to immediate crisis. Margaret rushed into the study, her expression pale with alarm. "Elena," she said breathlessly, "there's a message. Your father called the main house line, said it was urgent, that you needed to come immediately, that something had happened." Elena's blood ran cold. She had not spoken to her father since fleeing the wedding, had assumed he would eventually accept her absence rather than pursue direct contact. The urgency in Margaret's voice suggested something serious had occurred, and despite everything, a flicker of worry for her father's well-being cut through her lingering resentment. "I need to call him back," Elena said, already moving toward the phone, before Damien caught her arm gently. "Wait," he said. "Given everything we have just discovered about Seraphine's manipulation, this could easily be another attempt to draw you away from safety." Elena hesitated, torn between caution and genuine concern for her father, despite his failures. "I have to know," she said finally. "If something happened to him, and I ignored it because of fear, I don't think I could live with that." Damien nodded slowly, understanding the impossible position she found herself in. "Then we will handle it together," he said. Carefully, and with full awareness that this might be exactly the trap we suspect it to be. The return call revealed a message from her father, his voice strained and unfamiliar in its vulnerability, explaining that he had fallen seriously ill and wished to see her, to apologize for the choices he had made regarding her engagement. He provided an address, a hospital several hours away, and pleaded for her to come, insisting he had only limited time remaining to make things right between them. "It could be genuine," Elena said uncertainly, after ending the call. He sounded different, sounded scared actually, in a way I've never heard from him before. "It could also be exactly the trap Seraphine and Richard have been working to construct," Corinne pointed out carefully. "A vulnerable moment, an urgent summons, exactly calculated to separate you from the estate's protection." Elena felt torn between competing fears, unable to fully trust either interpretation of the situation. She thought of her father's disappointed expression when she had begged him not to sign the engagement papers, the years of feeling unloved and unseen within her own family, and against all reasonable caution, found herself desperately hoping the concern might be genuine, that some part of her father might still care enough to seek reconciliation before it was too late. "I have to go," she said finally, her voice firm, despite the obvious risk. "If it's genuine, I cannot forgive myself for staying away out of fear. If it's a trap, then we face it together, prepared, rather than caught unaware." Damien studied her carefully, respect and worry warring visibly behind his controlled expression. "Then we go together," he said, "with appropriate precautions. I will not let you walk into potential danger alone, Elena, regardless of how this situation resolves." They departed within the hour, a small group of trusted pack members accompanying them for additional security, Corinne remaining behind to continue monitoring Seraphine's movements and gather further evidence of her interference. The drive to the hospital passed in tense silence, Elena's mind racing between hope for genuine reconciliation and fear of walking directly into danger. The hospital, when they arrived, appeared ordinary and unremarkable, offering little indication of whether the summons had been genuine or manufactured. Elena made her way toward the room number her father had provided, Damien close beside her, alert and watchful despite his outward calm. They found the room empty. Elena's stomach dropped with sudden, sickening understanding as she turned to find Damien's expression hardening into fierce, protective alertness. "This was the trap," she whispered, fear coiling tight in her chest. Before either of them could react further, the door behind them closed, with sudden, deliberate force, and Elena turned to find Richard standing there, his expression carrying none of the false charm from their previous encounter, only cold, calculated triumph. "Hello, Elena," he said quietly. "Did you really think I would simply walk away after our last conversation?" Elena's heart pounded painfully as Damien positioned himself protectively between her and Richard, every line of his body coiled with barely restrained fury. The trap had worked exactly as intended, drawing them away from the estate's protection into unfamiliar territory, where Richard clearly believed he held the advantage. "Whatever you think you're accomplishing here," Damien said, his voice dangerously calm despite the tension radiating from his posture, "you have severely miscalculated the consequences awaiting you." Richard's confident smile faltered only slightly at the controlled menace in Damien's voice, though he did not retreat from his position blocking their exit. "We'll see about that," he said, reaching into his jacket with deliberate slowness. Elena's breath caught painfully, fear and fierce determination tangling together as she realized, with sudden clarity, that whatever happened in the next few moments would determine far more than simply her own safety. It would determine whether she remained forever defined by fear, or whether she finally, fully, reclaimed the strength she had been slowly rebuilding since the night Damien found her crying in the storm. Richard withdrew his hand slowly from his jacket, revealing not a weapon, as Elena had feared, but a folded document, its edges worn from repeated handling. He held it up with the same cold satisfaction he had once used to control every aspect of her life. "Your father's signature," he said, "on a legal agreement that still binds your family to me, regardless of your little escape. I have lawyers prepared to pursue every consequence available to me, Elena. Your disappearance has cost me significant embarrassment, and I intend to be compensated for that, one way or another." Elena felt a strange mixture of relief and continued fear wash through her. Whatever Richard's intentions, immediate physical danger seemed, at least for the moment, less certain than she had feared. Yet the calculated cruelty in his eyes reminded her sharply that his control had never required violence to be devastating. "Those documents mean nothing," Damien said firmly, stepping slightly further between Elena and Richard without losing his composed control. "Elena is not property to be claimed through paperwork signed under duress," Any legal challenge you pursue will be met with resources you cannot begin to match. Richard's expression flickered with uncertainty for the first time, clearly unprepared for the depth of resolve he faced. "This isn't your fight," he said, directing his attention pointedly toward Damien. "Whoever you think you are, you have no standing in this matter." "I have every standing," Damien said, his voice carrying quiet, unshakable authority. "Elena is under my protection, in every sense that matters. Whatever legal games you attempt to play, you will find yourself facing consequences far beyond what any court could address." The underlying threat in Damien's carefully controlled tone was unmistakable, and Elena watched as genuine uncertainty finally cracked through Richard's confident facade. For the first time since she had known him, she saw something close to fear flicker behind his cold eyes. "You're both fools if you think this ends here," Richard said, though his voice had lost much of its earlier conviction. He took a step back toward the door, clearly reassessing the situation, now that his expected advantage had failed to materialize as planned. "It ends here," Elena said suddenly, her own voice steady, despite the fear still coursing through her. "Not because Damien is protecting me, though I am grateful for that. It ends here because I refuse to let you control any more of my life, Richard. The debt was never mine to pay. My father's mistakes were never mine to inherit, and whatever legal games you pursue, you will find that I am no longer the frightened woman who once believed she had no other choice." Richard studied her for a long moment, something unreadable passing behind his expression, before he finally, without another word, turned and left the room, the door closing firmly behind him. The silence that followed felt heavy with released tension, Elena's legs finally giving way beneath the weight of accumulated fear and adrenaline. Damien caught her gently, guiding her to sit on the edge of the empty hospital bed as her breathing gradually steadied. "That was incredibly brave," Damien said softly, kneeling before her, concern and admiration mingling in his expression. "I was so scared," Elena admitted, her voice shaking slightly, even as relief began replacing the sharpest edges of her fear. "Fear and bravery are not opposites," Damien reminded her gently, echoing words he had offered once before. "You faced him directly, Elena, despite every reason to run. That takes remarkable strength." They remained there for several long moments, gathering themselves before making their way carefully back toward the hospital entrance, alert for any further complications Richard or Seraphine's scheming might have prepared. Fortunately, the remainder of their departure passed without incident, and soon they were back in the car, making their way toward the estate that had, in such a short time, become the closest thing to true home Elena had ever known. News of the confrontation reached the estate before they did, Corinne having maintained careful communication throughout their absence. When they arrived, she met them at the entrance, her expression carrying a mixture of relief and renewed urgency. "There is more you need to know," she said without preamble. "While you were away, I gathered further evidence of Seraphine's involvement. She did not simply provide information to Richard. She orchestrated the entire hospital deception, coordinating directly with him to lure you both away from the estate's protection." Elena felt fresh anger rise at the confirmation of such deliberate manipulation. "Why would she go to such lengths?" she asked. "What does she actually gain from all of this?" "Position," Corinne said simply. "If the bond between you and the Alpha fractures under pressure, or if scandal weakens his standing sufficiently, certain factions within the council might reconsider alternative arrangements more favorable to Seraphine's family ambitions. She has been playing a long, patient game, using whatever tools presented themselves." Damien's expression hardened with controlled fury at the full scope of the scheme laid bare before him. "This ends now," he said firmly. "Whatever patience I extended toward her previous behavior, deliberate endangerment of Elena's safety, crosses lines that cannot be forgiven or overlooked." That evening, Damien called for an emergency gathering of PAC leadership, presenting the evidence Corinne had carefully compiled regarding Seraphine's manipulation and interference. Elena stood beside him throughout the proceedings, no longer hesitant to claim her place within this world that had become genuinely her own. Seraphine, when confronted directly with the evidence against her, offered little genuine denial, her calculated composure finally cracking under the weight of undeniable proof. "I only sought what was rightfully mine to pursue," she said coldly, though the words carried little conviction against the clear evidence of her manipulation. Nothing about endangering an innocent person's safety was rightfully yours to pursue, Damien said firmly, his voice carrying the full weight of his authority as Alpha. Your actions have consequences, Seraphine, consequences the Council will address fully, given the evidence now before them. The gathered pack leadership, having witnessed the full scope of Seraphine's scheming, offered little sympathy toward her position. Whatever ambitions she had once harbored regarding alliance with Damien's pack dissolved entirely in the face of her exposed manipulation, and she was escorted from the estate that night, facing consequences that would be determined through proper channels in the days that followed. As the gathering dispersed, Elena found herself standing quietly beside Damien in the now empty hall, exhaustion and profound relief settling over her in equal measure. The danger that had shadowed their growing happiness for weeks had finally been fully exposed and addressed, leaving space, at last, for something like genuine peace to take root. It's over, Elena said quietly, testing the words as though needing to confirm their truth by speaking them aloud. It's over, Damien confirmed, turning to face her fully, warmth and relief evident in his steady gaze. Whatever challenges remain ahead, Elena, we face them now, without the shadow of hidden schemes working against us. Elena felt something settle deeply within her chest, a sense of security she had not known she was capable of feeling so completely. She thought of the frightened woman who had collapsed in the storm months ago, uncertain of her own worth, convinced that danger and control defined the entirety of her future. That woman felt distant now, replaced by someone stronger, someone who had faced her deepest fears directly, and emerged, not unscathed, but undeniably whole. Thank you, she said softly, reaching for Damien's hand, for never giving up on me, even when I wasn't sure I deserved that kind of loyalty. You have always deserved it, Damien said firmly, lifting her hand gently to press a soft kiss against her knuckles. From the very first moment I found you in that storm, Elena, I knew you were worth every bit of patience, every challenge we might face together. Outside, the sky had cleared entirely, stars scattering brilliantly across the darkness, in a display that felt, to Elena, like quiet celebration of the peace they had finally, fully earned. Spring arrived at the estate with a gentleness that felt, to Elena, like the world itself acknowledging the peace she had finally found. The gardens bloomed in colors she had never taken the time to notice before, and mornings no longer carried the tense vigilance that had shadowed her earliest weeks within these walls. Richard's legal threats had dissolved quickly once his manipulation and coordination with Seraphine came to light, exposing him to consequences of his own that left him with far more pressing concerns than pursuing a woman who had never belonged to him in the first place. Her father, when she finally spoke with him honestly, offered an apology that felt, if not complete, at least genuine enough to begin a slow, careful path toward reconciliation, built on terms Elena herself defined, rather than terms imposed upon her. Seraphine's schemes, once fully exposed, resulted in her family's standing within the council diminishing considerably, a consequence that rippled through pack politics in the months that followed, though Elena found she carried little satisfaction in watching someone else's downfall, focusing instead on the life she was steadily building, rather than the shadows finally left behind her. The council, too, had gradually shifted in their assessment of the bond between Elena and Damien. Elder Whitlock, in particular, had grown notably warmer following the events surrounding Richard and Seraphine's scheming, impressed by the strength and resolve Elena had demonstrated throughout the ordeal. I confess, he told her during a formal visit some months later, I did not expect a human woman to handle such pressure with the grace and courage you have shown. The council's concerns, I think, have been thoroughly addressed. Elena had smiled at his words, no longer needing external validation to feel secure in her place within this world, though the acknowledgement still carried meaningful weight after everything she had endured to reach this point. It was on a warm evening, months after the storm that had first brought her to Damien's door, that he asked her to join him in the garden, his expression carrying a nervous energy she had rarely seen from him before. Elena followed, curious and faintly amused by his uncharacteristic hesitance, until they reached a quiet clearing, where soft lantern light illuminated the space, casting a warm glow over flowers she recognized from Tobias's careful tending. Damien, she said, laughing softly, what is all this? I wanted tonight to be memorable, he admitted, taking both her hands in his own, his usual steady composure, giving way to something more vulnerable, more openly hopeful than she had ever witnessed from him. Elena, from the moment I found you in that storm, something changed within me permanently. I do not believe in coincidence, not truly. I believe you were meant to find your way to me, just as much as I was meant to find you. Elena felt her heart swell with emotion, memories of that frightened, desperate night mingling with the profound gratitude she now carried for everything that had unfolded since. I believe that too, she said softly. I didn't at first, but I do now. Completely. I am not asking you to accept the mate bond out of obligation, or fear, or anything beyond genuine choice, Damien continued, his voice steady, despite the emotion evident beneath his words. I am asking you, freely and completely, whether you choose this life with me. Not because instinct decided it, but because you, Elena Marsh, choose it for yourself. Elena felt tears gather in her eyes, though these carried none of the desperate sorrow of that first storm, only overwhelming joy and certainty she had never expected to feel so completely. I choose you, she said, her voice steady and sure. Not because I have to, not because some ancient bond demands it, but because you have shown me, every single day since that storm, what genuine love and respect actually look like. I choose this life, Damien. I choose you. Damien's expression broke into a smile of pure, unguarded joy, and he pulled her close, the warmth of his embrace carrying none of the fear or uncertainty that had once defined every relationship Elena had known before him. Then let us begin properly, he said softly against her hair, not as alpha and reluctant guest, not as protector and refugee, but as equals, choosing each other freely, for the rest of our lives. The following weeks brought preparation for a celebration unlike anything Elena had ever witnessed. The entire pack community, gathering to honor the formal joining of their alpha, with the woman who had proven herself worthy of the position, through courage, resilience, and genuine kindness, rather than mere circumstance. Margaret oversaw the preparations with characteristic warmth. Tobias filled the estate with flowers gathered from gardens Elena herself had helped tend, and even Corinne, once so cautious and distant, stood proudly beside Elena as she prepared for the ceremony that would formally recognize her place within this world she had once found impossible to believe in. On the day of the ceremony, Elena stood at the edge of the same gardens where Damien had asked her to choose this life freely, surrounded by faces that had grown from strangers into genuine friends, a community that had welcomed her, cautiously at first, and then wholeheartedly, into their fold. She thought of the frightened, desperate woman who had collapsed in the storm months ago, certain that her life held nothing beyond fear and control, and felt profound gratitude for the journey that had led her, against every expectation, to this moment of complete, unshakable joy. Damien waited for her beneath an arch of flowers, his expression carrying the same steady warmth that had first drawn her trust on that stormy night, though now openly filled with love rather than careful, patient reserve. As she made her way toward him, surrounded by the community that had become her family, Elena felt the last remnants of old fear finally, completely dissolve, replaced entirely by the quiet, unshakable certainty that she had found exactly where she belonged. You're mine now, Damien whispered softly, as she reached him, echoing the words he had first spoken in the storm, though now carrying an entirely different weight, free of uncertainty or claim, carrying instead the simple truth of mutual, freely chosen devotion. And you're mine, Elena whispered back, smiling through happy tears, as the ceremony began, the community around them erupting into joyful celebration. In the months and years that followed, Elena grew fully into her role beside Damien, no longer the frightened woman who had once believed herself powerless against the forces controlling her life, but a genuine partner, respected throughout the pack community for the same strength and resilience that had first caught Damien's attention in that storm so long ago. She continued tending the gardens alongside Tobias, continued learning recipes from Margaret's careful guidance, continued building a friendship with Corinne that had grown, over time, into genuine, deep loyalty. The storm that had once seemed like the worst night of her life had become, in retrospect, the beginning of everything good that followed, proof that even the darkest moments could lead, with courage and patience, toward light unimaginable at the time. Elena often found herself standing in the gardens during quiet evenings, remembering the desperate, frightened woman who had collapsed in the mud all those months ago, grateful beyond words for the steady voice that had found her there and promised safety she had not believed possible. She had run that night believing she was fleeing toward nothing, escaping one danger only to face uncertain darkness beyond. Instead, she had run directly into the life she had never known to hope for, a life built on genuine respect, patient love, and the quiet, unshakable strength she had discovered within herself along the way. The Alpha King had found her crying in the rain, and in claiming her as his own, had given her back everything she once believed lost forever. Not through ownership or control, but through patient, genuine devotion that asked nothing beyond her own free, wholehearted choice. And in choosing him back, fully and completely, Elena had finally found the home she had spent her entire life searching for, without ever quite knowing what she was looking for, until the storm brought her, finally, exactly where she belonged.